How did it go? Did Mom and Dad get the money?
Yeah, they took it without any fuss.
That's good.
Oh, and your mother said she feels bad about the trouble we're going through for them. Is there anything you want me to tell your father to pass on to your mother about the money we're sending?
Well, tell them to use it to keep the heating on.
My husband and I decided to send money to my parents who live in a $2,000 each month public housing unit in New York, where they spend summers with just a fan and winters without heating in order to save money. Due to certain reasons, we planned to send $6,000 for the first 6 months, and then $600 per month thereafter. We thought they might refuse the money, not wanting to burden us, but my husband managed to talk them into accepting it. This way, they won't have to go through another winter without heating. 3 months into sending them money.
So, I'll count on you for this month too.
Sure, got it. Is there anything you want me to tell Mom and Dad?
Not really.
Since my husband visits my parents once a week for errands, we've arranged for him to deliver the money. Moreover, my husband relays messages from my parents to me. He also relays messages from me to my parents. Having this efficient messenger means I've gradually lost the need to contact my parents directly. However, just hearing about them from my husband makes me miss not talking to them directly. Although there's no particular reason to contact them, it's been 6 months since they moved and 3 months since we started sending money, so I decided to casually email my mom to ask how they're doing. After a while, I got a reply from her that made me do a double take.
Has it been about 6 months since you moved? Have you gotten used to the new place? Thanks for sending $60 every month. We were able to keep the heating on this winter because of that.
What? $60? You mean $6,000, right?
$6,000? What's that?
You didn't get $6,000 from my husband?
We've only been getting $60 though.
I always hand my husband an envelope with $6,000 in it. He's supposed to give it to my parents. If my mom says she's only getting $60, then the only suspect could be my husband. I can't forgive him, even if he is my husband, for stealing into the money meant for my parents. I was furious, but I knew I needed to let him explain why he did this first. My name is Hazel. I'm 36 years old and work as an office employee. I was born and raised in New York, but when I say that, people often assume I'm a city girl or wealthy. However, all of New York isn't all bustling cityscapes. A bit away from the city, you can find rural areas with fields. I grew up in this rural area, not the New York people usually imagine. My parents ran a diner in one of these rural parts of New York. Our house was combined with the diner. The first floor was the diner and the second was our living space. Since the diner and our home were together, I naturally saw my parents working all the time. Their work didn't seem too hectic, just a bit busy around lunch and dinner. The reason it got a bit chaotic during busy hours was that my parents managed the diner by themselves without hiring any staff. Not being able to afford employees, I used to worry every day during my middle school years about whether the diner and my parents were okay. Though there were times when we were in the red when I was younger and we weren't living luxuriously, it seems we were making enough for the 3 of us to get by. It's been nearly 20 years since I graduated high school and left home, but my parents are still running the diner. I don't know much about the business, but maybe the diner's sales aren't as bad as I thought. I found a job and left home after high school. I moved out of New York, but I lived close enough to return home by car. So, after getting a job, I would often go back to my parents' place on weekends. 5 years into my job, spring came for me. Here, your beer and the usual French fry. I'll be done in about an hour, so wait for me.
Got it. Work hard, okay?
I got my first boyfriend ever. Andrew, who would later become my husband, was a staff member at my favorite bar. He's a year older than me and had been working at the bar since his college days, choosing to continue there rather than finding a different job after graduating. But it wasn't that he became a part-time worker.
I want to save up money, gain skills and knowledge, and open my own place before I turn 30 years old.
My dad said he got his own place around that age, so I believe you can do it, Andrew. Keep it up. Andrew always sparkled in his eyes when he talked about his goals, a habit of his. For me, who just wanted to get out of the countryside and get a job right after high school, my goal-oriented husband looked dazzling. Our relationship continued for a long time, but due to Andrew paying his due, we couldn't get married before we were almost 30. We thought we'd marry once Andrew opened his shop and its revenue stabilized. However, Andrew wanted to own his shop before 30, but even after turning 30, he hadn't managed to. Maybe it's become harder to own a shop than it was in my father's era? However, for years past his goal. At 34 for Andrew and 33 for me, he finally managed to open his own place. It's quite a respectable shop you've got here. I didn't want to compromise. That's why the opening was much delayed than planned. But achieving your goal like this is amazing. Most goals end up not being realized. Stop it, making it sound like this is the goal. The real challenge starts now. Andrew was proud of the shop he built through hardships. Though he says the hardest part is yet to come, knowing my husband, a typical hard worker. He'll diligently work and gradually build up results, just like during his apprenticeship. We were happy that Andrew's shop was up and running, but there was one problem.
We're already in our mid-30s, huh? Sorry. It's my fault for delaying our plans. I think that's unavoidable. But waiting until the shop stabilizes from here on is, frankly, too much. Yeah, you're right.
I tried to put some gentle pressure on my husband. If I waited for his shop to stabilize, who knows when we could get married. It seemed like he also thought that we couldn't postpone getting married any longer, so we decided to get married sooner than planned. However, we decided to see how things go regarding children. Having kids while struggling could make the children suffer or cause unnecessary worry and anxiety. I've experienced this myself as a child. Both my husband and I are okay with not having children, so it's not a problem. But I do feel a bit guilty about not being able to show my parents their grandchildren. However, the most important thing right now is for my husband's shop to thrive. If his shop can't be maintained, then having children is out of the question. I decided to do all the household work so that he could focus on the shop. Having helped out at my parents' diner, I also started helping at my husband's shop from time to time. There are times when it feels physically demanding, but since my husband is also working hard, I keep my complaints to myself and persevere. Besides, there's a sense of fulfillment in struggling and thriving together as a couple. I imagined a future where we would continue to support and uplift each other. However, reality was already starting to veer in a different direction from what I had imagined. His shop was doing well for a while after opening. I thought at this rate, the shop would be able to keep going without issues, but the world isn't so lenient.
It's no good. The good performance was only for the first 3 months, and after that, sales have only gone down.
We've just started, haven't we? Let's keep at it.
I'd keep at it if time was all we had. But we have to pay back the loan we took out to open the shop, not to mention monthly rent and payroll. At this rate, we'll run out of funds soon.
I thought we just needed to keep working hard at the shop, but it seems my thinking was naive. A shop needs to continuously produce results to be maintained. I've come to realize just how incredible my parents are for running a diner for so long. I can't help but think of my parents' hard work.
Right. Why don't we talk to my parents? They've been running a diner for over 30 years, so they might have some advice for us. Let's go ask them. Yeah, that's true. Even if it's embarrassing or pitiful, we're not in a position to worry about appearances.
We went to my parents with grasping at straws.
About Andrew's shop, it started off well right after opening, but then sales only went downhill. Is there no stopping it? Are we going to have to close the shop at this rate?
Hey now, don't talk about closing the shop so easily. Andrew went through a long apprenticeship and finally opened his own place, didn't he? Do you know how much he's put into that shop? Both money and effort. Even if you have to close it, it's not something that can be done easily. I was suddenly scolded by my father. My husband also looked surprised, as I had suddenly started talking about closing the shop. It seems there's a big difference in values and thinking between those who are business owners and those who are not. I thought it would be better to close before the losses get too big if the shop is running at a loss, but it seems it's not that simple. If I, who knows nothing, keep talking, I'll probably just keep making blunders, so I decided to keep quiet for a bit.
Excuse me, but from what Hazel told me, I heard there aren't many customers, but that doesn't seem to be the case, does it? It looked crowded before the lunch break, and despite hearing that it's the countryside with fewer people, there seemed to be people around outside.
That's because this area has become a tourist spot recently. According to my mother, in the last few years, this place has become popular as a spot where you can enjoy rural scenery just a short distance from the city center. A lot of people come, and while it's not exactly booming, more people have been coming to the local area than before, and accordingly, customers have started coming to my parents' diner.
Do you run the diner with just the two of you even though the number of customers has increased? Don't you hire part-timers?
We have a friend come help on weekends, but that's the only part-timer.
Why is that? If you had more part-timers to speed up service, wouldn't the turnover rate and sales increase?
We do make an effort to increase sales, but more importantly, we're committed to cutting costs. That's why we hire as few people as possible, keep the interior decoration old, and don't distribute flyers.
And that increases your customers?
If the food and service are good, customers will come back. Plus, customers bring other customers. That's how we gradually increase our regulars. But our way is the old-fashioned method, possible because our diner has been around for over 30 years. Andrew needs to produce results immediately, so he doesn't have the luxury of time to slowly build up a regular clientele over 30 years. Besides, the way to grow a business has changed from 30 years ago. Now, just being tasty isn't enough for a restaurant to thrive. Hearing my father's talk, it was clear that there wasn't anything we could immediately replicate, and Andrew seemed a bit disheartened. However, there were things in my father's talk that could be emulated, and it seems like he's willing to support my husband.
We buy vegetables cheaply from local farmers around here. We also get meat at a discount from a butcher we've known for years. I can ask if you could get the same prices. It should significantly reduce your procurement costs. But farmers and the butcher won't deliver, right? The butcher's shop is too far from my restaurant, so it would be outside their delivery area. If that's the case, come pick it up here regularly. We can keep it for you. It's a bit of a drive, but if it's for reducing procurement costs, you can manage it, right? Dad, commuting here every time is too much of a burden. But once a week might be manageable, right? If you run out of ingredients before the week is up, you can just buy from your current suppliers.
That sounds doable without too much trouble. I can make a lump sum payment to the suppliers at the end of the month. I felt like an outsider as my husband and father worked out the details. Andrew decided to visit my parents' house once a week. It seemed like a lot of extra effort to me. Even with slightly reduced procurement costs, I couldn't see it making a big impact on the business. But Andrew seemed happy. That must be the difference in perspective between business owners and others. Seeing Andrew's happy face, my father seemed pleased too, and then he made an astonishing offer.
People flock to a new shop out of novelty, but that fades after a while. That's where your shop is right now. From this point, it's the real deal and struggles are inevitable. Funds aren't infinite either.
That's true. It's been days of anxiety over declining sales.
I'll lend you some money. We don't have much to spare, so $30,000 is the limit. Once the shop is on track, you can pay us back little by little.
Wait, Dad! I was shocked my father suddenly offered to lend such a significant amount.
Wait, Dad.
My mother chimed in quietly. That made sense. Even though our local area has become a tourist spot and customer numbers have increased, my parents' diner isn't exactly booming. It was natural for my mother to try to stop my father.
$30,000 will run out in a few months, won't it? But we can't keep going like this. That's true, but I'm sorry we can't be of more help.
No, not at all. But, are you sure?
Please, accept it. Dad wants to support young people working hard, remembering how it was for him. Hey, Mom, don't embarrass me.
It seemed I was the only one left out again. Perhaps being a business owner requires this level of boldness and grandeur. I felt like my parents lived in a different world from me. After meeting with my parents, my husband became even more determined with his shop. Now, 3 years later, Andrew's shop has been slowly increasing its sales. However, the income isn't very much, just enough for one person to live on. Still, considering how much we worried about the shop's revenue before, it feels like progress. There's no issue with our living expenses since I'm also working. Andrew's shop is something to look forward to in the future. I was feeling relieved about his shop doing fairly well, but then a problem arose with my parents' diner.
See? No warm air is coming out at all. That's true. It's just making noise.
When we stopped by my parents' diner, they shared the problem they were facing. Apparently, the air conditioner had broken. And the refrigerator was also starting to fail.
Are you going to repair them or replace them? They're quite old, so I doubt repairs would suffice. Are you going to replace them?
Andrew seemed surprised that my father was considering replacing both the air conditioner and the refrigerator, but I wondered why he was so surprised. Here again, I keenly felt the difference in perspective.
If it can't be repaired, then we have no choice but to replace it, right?
You know, how much do you think a commercial air conditioner and refrigerator cost? It's not like the ones we have at home.
How much are we talking about?
Well, even if we buy used ones, it would cost about as much as a pretty decent used car.
A car's worth, really?
Even though we're talking about a commercial air conditioner and refrigerator, I thought $6,000 would be enough to buy them, but it seems even used ones would cost about 3 times that. For some, it could cost even more. I now understood what my mother meant when she said that $30,000 would melt away quickly.
But, expensive as they may be, we can't run a diner without an air conditioner and a refrigerator, can we? That's true. So, we're thinking of closing up shop a bit earlier than expected. Mom and Dad are still in good health, aren't they? Dad's over 65 and I'm 64. Even if we make a big purchase to keep the shop going, how many more years can we work? That's why we thought it might be a good time to stop. Running a diner is physically demanding, and the tourist boom in this area has cooled down. It's about time to call it quits. But, if your parents have decided, it's not our place to interfere, right?
I felt a bit sad, but it seemed inevitable. My parents had worked hard for so long, so I wanted them to enjoy a leisurely life from now on. However, closing the diner led to a new set of problems.
Rent around here is high despite the countryside. Really. We never really thought about it when the rent for the shop and our home were the same. Rent costs more than I thought.
Since my parents lived above their diner, closing it meant they had to move out. They moved to a nearby apartment, but now they were struggling with the rent. The store had to be completely cleared out, costing a significant amount in demolition fees. My parents, who never had a lot of money, must have felt the big damage. Also, being self-employed, their pension is only about $1,200 a month. As a result, they started to live very frugally, considering their future. The arrangement for my husband to pick up ingredients continued. My father would have the ingredients delivered to his house, and my husband would go there to pick them up. Being able to check on my parents once a week was a good thing, in my view. According to my husband, they're getting through the summer using only fans instead of air conditioning. Even though they're used to the heat in the countryside, my parents are getting old. I was so worried that I decided to discuss what we could do for my parents.
Can't we live together with my parents?
Live together?
Didn't your parents object to that? Yes. They don't want to bother us. They say they're still healthy and we shouldn't worry. Pushing for cohabitation when they're against it doesn't seem right. But isn't it bad for my parents to continue living as they are now?
True.
How about we try to mimic your parents' approach and find a way to reduce the rent? Can you really lower rent? Even in that countryside, it's pretty steep.
I have a good idea. My husband had some plans and started fiddling with his smartphone, then showed me a website.
Public housing, huh? The average rent is a little over $2,000. Maybe this could work? It looks like it could.
My husband and I found a good solution and promptly proposed it to my parents. They agreed to our suggestion and decided to move to public housing. However, it wasn't as easy as we thought. To qualify for public housing, one must meet certain criteria and then pass a lottery held 4 times a year. Qualifying was fine, but the lottery was a tough hurdle.
Hello. It seems we didn't make it this time. That's okay. Let's apply again next time.
My parents didn't win the lottery, so they decided to continue living in their current apartment. According to my husband, just like when they endured the summer without air conditioning, they're also getting through the winter without heating. My parents are wearing 4 pairs of socks, 4 sports tights, 4 shirts topped with a hoodie, and even gloves inside the house. I invited them to come stay with us until it gets warmer, but they declined. All I could do was pray for them to win in the next lottery. But life isn't always so forgiving.
We didn't make it this time either. Don't give up. Let's keep applying.
They've been unsuccessful in the lottery 4 times. I was starting to feel a bit hopeless, thinking it might be impossible. Strangely, it seems like my luck gets better when my desires lessen.
We finally made it through. Really? That's great.
It looks like we can move before winter. We need to start preparing now. My mother's voice, even through the phone, was noticeably brighter after securing the right to move after a year. Her cheerfulness wasn't just because of the move. The rent for the public housing can vary based on the occupant's situation and conditions, and it seems my parents got it for $2,000 a month. This would significantly lower their rent, and they should be able to say goodbye to the lifestyle of enduring without heating. However, it seems that wasn't the case.
Your parents have been without heating yet. Why? With lower rent, they should be able to afford heating, right? Maybe they feel anxious without money in hand? They spent money on demolishing the shop, and their pension isn't that much. Then, moving didn't solve anything.
My attempt to solve my parents' problem by lowering the rent, as my husband suggested, didn't work. So, I proposed a new idea to my husband.
Can we send them about $600 a month? $600 a month, huh? And Andrew, we borrowed $30,000 from my dad, right? How about starting to pay that back?
$30,000?
Not all at once, of course. Like $6,000 a month for half a year. That makes $36,000. A bit extra as a thank you. After half a year, we start sending $600 a month. That way, they have an extra $36,000 on hand and a monthly $600 coming in, so they won't have to save excessively, don't you think?
But $6,000 a month?
Is $6,000 a month impossible with the current state of the shop? Then remember, the $30,000 is the money you borrowed, but the monthly support is something I'm proposing, so I'll cover half. $3,000 a month for half a year, huh? Is that still too much? Is the shop not doing well? Has the situation changed this year?
No, it's fine. Let's do that.
Otherwise, my in-laws will have to bundle up indoors again this winter.
My husband agreed to the idea of sending money to my parents. However, knowing my parents, who refused to live with us because they didn't want to be a burden, there's a chance they might not accept the money.
The problem is how to give them the money.
Leave that to me.
I'm better at this kind of negotiation since I run the shop. Plus, since I was the one who borrowed the $30,000, I think it's only right for me to talk about it. If I tell them the shop is doing well, maybe my father-in-law will be in a good mood and accept the money.
Got it.
I'll leave it to Andrew, then.
The following week, I gave my husband an envelope with $6,000 to take with him when he went to pick up ingredients at my parents' place.
Make sure you hand over the money. Try hard. I'm not quite sure how one tries hard to hand over money, but I'll do it.
Leaving the financial support to my husband turned out to be a big mistake. That night, I asked my husband about the support before even greeting him.
How did it go? Did Mom and Dad take the money?
Yeah, they accepted it without any fuss.
That's good.
I was surprised my parents accepted the money so readily. It must have been because of how my husband spoke to them. Now, I thought they would finally stop saving more than necessary.
Oh yeah, your mother said she feels bad about the trouble we're going through for them. Hazel, do you have anything you want me to tell your father or your mother about the support? Well, tell them to use it to keep the heating on.
I was happy, thinking the problem with my parents had been solved. My husband seemed happy too. He must have been worried about my parents as well. 3 months into sending them support.
So, I'll count on you for this month too.
Got it.
Is there anything you want me to tell Mom and Dad? Not really.
My husband took the envelope with $6,000 and left the house. He always relays messages from my parents to me. And he conveys my messages to my parents as well. Having such an efficient messenger meant I gradually lost the need to contact my parents directly. Still, I felt lonely not contacting them at all. Although there's no particular reason to contact them, it's been 6 months since they moved and 3 months since we started sending support, so I decided to casually email my mom to ask how they're doing now.
Has it been about 6 months since you moved? Have you gotten used to the new place?
After a while, I got a reply from her. It made me do a double take.
Thanks for the $60 every month. Thanks to that, we were able to keep the heating on this winter. What? $60? You mean $6,000, right? Huh? $6,000? What's that? You didn't get $6,000 from Andrew? We only got $60 though.
I always give my husband an envelope with $6,000 in it. He's supposed to give it to my parents. If my mom only received $60, then the only person who could be responsible is my husband. Andrew has received business advice, borrowed money, and gotten support for supplies from my parents, who he owes a lot to. The idea that he could be using the money meant for them is unforgivable, even if he is my husband. I was furious, but I knew I needed to let him explain why he did this first. The day before the 4th month of sending support.
Andrew, you're going to my parents tomorrow, right? I'll put the money in your bag.
Okay, got it. The next morning, I left for work as usual. About an hour after I left, my husband was supposed to head to my parents. I hurried to make sure I wasn't late. My husband arrived at my parents' house. He handed the envelope with money to my mom at the entrance. He seemed a bit nervous.
It seems like the amount is much less this time. Did Hazel talk to you about anything?
The amount hasn't decreased, right? It's the usual $60.
Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be at work?
I took the day off to come here. To catch you in your wrongdoing. I emerged from the back of the house with my dad, addressing my husband. Knowing he had been caught stealing the money, my husband's face clearly showed panic. Since he seemed at a loss for words, I decided to explain the whole situation. "You've been using the $6,000 for the shop, haven't you?"
"So, you knew that much?"
"Yes.
I occasionally help out at the shop, right? I've checked the daily sales a few times when closing the register. Plus, I asked about the rent when we were setting up the shop, and from the size of the store and the electric bills, Dad, with his experience, could roughly estimate. He's been running his shop for over 30 years, after all. Gathering this kind of information gives us a good idea of the shop's situation."
"Andrew, the shop has been in quite a tough spot recently, hasn't it?"
"I think the sales haven't reached the break-even point." I didn't know much about the shop's situation. I thought having customers meant there was no problem, but that wasn't the case, right?
Seeing that my dad and I had figured everything out, the look of panic faded from my husband's face. He resigned himself to the situation and honestly explained everything.
"Running the shop costs a lot of money. Just the payroll costs nearly $20,000. Plus, there are repayments for loans, rent, and other payments. A few customers coming in doesn't mean we're making a profit."
"If the shop was struggling, why didn't you tell me?"
"We've been open for about 5 years, right? I thought if you knew we were in the red not just at the beginning but now, you'd think it's time to close the shop."
"So, you hid the deficit because you didn't want to close the shop."
"Right. That's why I couldn't refuse the support talk. If it became apparent we couldn't afford to give support, it would reveal the shop was in the red. I understand not wanting to close the shop after 5 years. But you should have consulted."
"I agree.
If I had been honest about the shop's situation, I wouldn't have done such a foolish thing. If you felt that way, you should have told me." "Stop it." He couldn't say it even if he wanted to.
My dad seemed to understand my husband's feelings. My mom had a similar expression. But understanding his feelings didn't mean my parents were going to let him off easy.
"Andrew, what's important in running a shop?"
"Trust.
From now on, we won't help with supplies for your sake, okay?"
"Yes." As my dad spoke, my husband became more submissive. I had been mostly out of the loop on the business side of the conversation, but now I felt like I could join in.
"Is there any money left?" "Out of the $18,000 taken in these 3 months, about $6,000 is left. Let's give that as this month's support to my parents, okay?" "Got it. I'll definitely pay back the remaining $24,000.
Promises to pay back are often used by those who don't. However, in my husband's case, he really will pay it back. It seems he's genuinely remorseful, and it would be cruel to blame him further, so I decided to bring him home. After closing his shop, my husband was left with about $60,000 in debt, including the startup loan balance and the costs of closing the shop. With $24,000 still owed to my parents, my husband's total debt amounted to $84,000. I've covered the debt to my parents, and I'm having my husband prioritize payments for the loan and closing costs. After closing the shop, my husband started working as a full-time employee at a supermarket. He's diligently working and repaying the debt bit by bit without any allowance. Even when I suggest he treat himself to something he likes or enjoys a nice meal, he insists on prioritizing debt repayment over spending money. While many might become despondent after seeing their dreams shattered, I think my husband is commendable for working earnestly. Seeing how earnestly my husband is working, my parents have forgiven him. I, too, believe that my husband was just overly determined to sustain his shop and temporarily lost his composure. So, while I was angry about the money taken from my parents, I never considered divorce. It's unfortunate that my husband's dream was crushed. With the debt repayment, our lifestyle isn't very comfortable. but I believe that couples should support each other more during tough times. I'm determined to continue supporting my earnestly working husband.